Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. Today I want to talk about movements, or more specifically, in-house movements, what that term means, what I think of it, and what you should think of it when you are presented with a watch from a brand with an in-house movement. So first off, why does it seem like every brand needs to have an in-house movement these days? Well, some of it comes from a decision made by ETA, a movement manufacturer for the Swatch Group, to restrict the sales of their movement to third parties. That's very much a story for another day. However, this is one of the things that has forced a lot of other brands to find other movement suppliers or make the decision to design and manufacture their own movement. Now this term in-house comes with quite a bit of ambiguity these days, and I think that's very much by design. A lot of brands use this term as a way to build in value and in turn raise the price for their watches. It also raises the cachet of the brand in a certain way to the general watch buying public. But if you're an enthusiast that's dug a bit further, I think you'll understand that this can mean a few different things. And when a lot of brands use this term in-house, what they really mean is in group. And a lot of these big groups that own a lot of watch brands have their own movement manufacturers as a part of them. The Richemont Group has Val Fleurier, for instance. Fossil Group has STP. And a brand like Tudor, who owns a majority of Kenissi, a manufacturer that makes movements not only for Tudor, but also for the likes of Chanel, Norqain, Fortis, and many others. In reality, it's quite rare to have a brand that fully manufactures everything themselves. These would be a fully vertically integrated manufacturer. Almost all watch brands, even watch brands that have in-house movements, are outsourcing some part of the manufacturing or design or engineering process of this. And further still, it's really hard to make a movement as good as something like a ETA 2824 or a Sellita SW300. Those are great movements that have a track record of success. They've worked through a lot of their kinks, and they've proven themselves to be true workhorses that will last a long time and are well understood and easily serviced, which is a really important part of the ownership process here. So I'd urge you to pause when you hear that term in-house. It doesn't necessarily make a watch better. Now, in my mind, an in-house movement starts to make sense at a certain point or for a specific purpose, unless you get high enough up the food chain of these watches that things like finishing techniques, hand finishing techniques, exotic materials, or anything like that really starts to make a difference. But when it comes to most practical watches, especially the watches that I like, tool watches, it generally doesn't hold a lot of water when I hear that term in-house. In fact, quite to the contrary, I see some brands use in-house movements where I feel like they didn't really need to. Now, where these moves start to make sense is where you're getting something that you understand the value of. For instance, Oris, who started making their in-house movement, the Caliber 400, which offers a 5-day power reserve, anti-magnetic components in the escapement. All those things are easy to understand the value of. However, you're paying for it. Whereas a brand like Tudor, who transitioned from those ETA movements into their own Kenissi movements, but didn't really change the pricing as they did it. And Tudor offers us a good example here of these Kenissi movements and how hard it is to make a good, simple movement. Of course, their movements from Kenissi have had their own growing pains, and it's taken a lot of years for them to get into a good, solid place here with those movements. And I think what this comes down to is what will matter to you, the buyer, when you're thinking about this stuff. And again, I would urge you to take caution and not just jumping into the, well, it's got an in-house movement, so it must be better. That's not always the case. And if you're looking for an in-house movement, I would suggest you really stop and consider why. What about that is appealing to you? And then look for movements that will bring those values to the table. For me personally, it's not something that I place a huge value on, and it's really something I only find interesting up in the higher ends of things, or if there's a uniquely engineered complication that's been added or something like that. Otherwise, I view it as something that could almost be more detrimental than it can be beneficial to a watch. But I know a lot of watch brands love it. They can put a higher price tag on these watches and it sounds a bit sexier, but it's not always that cut and dry. You really got to think about the serviceability of these watches in the long term, the warranty, how easy will replacement parts be to come by. All of these things can end up being detrimental to the owner over the long haul. So generally, when it comes to tool watches or workhorse watches, the kind of watches that I really enjoy, I prefer that they stick with the tried and true examples. Having that in-house movement isn't as important to me. But I'm curious to know what you think. What do you think about in-house movements? What does that term mean to you? Does it add any value to the watch to you? Is it something that you really care about? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this down below. At what point does it make a lot of sense? And at what point do you feel like, why am I paying for this? If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. And if you enjoyed this content, a like and a share helps me out a lot. A reminder that the Deep Track is viewer supported. I'll leave a link to our Patreon down below as well. With that, thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care.